All right, I had a video request on how to figure out what the correct end is on the H6, H7, because I know it's very frustrating to try and figure that out as a student, okay? So here's the H6, H7, okay? Just a few things about it before I get started on the correct end. Remember, this is a sickle scaler. It has a pointed tip, and it has two cutting edges, one on each side, one on this side and one on this side. And the terminal shank, if you look at where the terminal shank is, I'm going to lean it this way. Here's the terminal shank right here, right before you start to see it's the instrument lean. This is the terminal shank right here. And then here's the face of the instrument. The terminal shank and the face of the instrument come perpendicular to each other. Okay, so that means that this instrument right here, when we scale using this instrument, we need to be at a 70 to 80 degree angle. If you don't know what that means that we're just going to lean the instrument towards the tooth surface we're working on just a little bit, and I'll show you that in just a second, okay? We usually don't use this on the root surfaces. It's not designed to be used on the root surfaces. It's very big. It has the two cutting edges, so that's not what it was designed to do. It was designed more to work on the enamel surfaces of the tooth. However, you can go subgingival as the tissue allows and in certain situations, okay? So how to figure out the correct working end? This is the big question, because if you look at this side and the other side, they look very similar. The only difference is, do you see that when we're looking at it here, how it leans a little bit this way? Okay, so if here's my terminal shank right here. This is going to be a big piece of figuring out what the correct end is. Here's my terminal shank, and then which way is the handle leaning? The handle's leaning towards this way. Okay, if I were to flip it around, it does this very slight lean to it, and that's what we have to pay attention to, okay? So here's the other side, okay? Here's the terminal shank, and where does my handle start to lean towards? The handle's starting to lean towards this side, okay? It's a very slight lean. So grab your instrument and try to see that very slight lean. So look at the terminal shank here, and then where does the handle lean? That's how we're going to figure out what the correct working end is when working on anterior teeth. Okay, so how I like to do it is, or teach it, is if I were to take a line, and I'm going to just draw a line down this tooth right here, okay? Remember, when we scale with on these anterior teeth, we cut them in half, and we'll scale the toward surfaces and the away surfaces. We call them the towards and the away surfaces, all right? So let's just say I'm on this tooth here that I just drew the line on, and I'm doing the toward surface on this tooth here, okay? How do I figure out the correct end is? Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to line up that terminal shank. Remember, that's just right here, right before you start to see that handle leaning towards a direction. Here's your terminal shank, okay? I want to line this terminal shank up with the long axis of the tooth here. So if I'm on the mesial, I'm kind of making it parallel with that line that I just created, which is the imaginary long axis of the tooth, okay? Do you see when I line that up, where does my handle start to lean towards? Maybe if I move my hand out of the way, you might be able to see that better. Where does my handle start to lean? It's leaning towards this side, away from that surface that I'm actually scaling. Instead, I want the handle to lean towards the surface that I'm scaling. So right now, if I'm on the towards surface, I want the handle to lean closer to where that line is, that imaginary line I just created. So if I flip it over, I'm going to line up that terminal shank straight up and down, kind of parallel with that imaginary long axis of the tooth. And now, let me see if I move my hand out of the way. Do you see where is the handle leaning towards? The handle's leaning towards that imaginary line, the middle of that tooth that I want to scale on, right? That's when I know I have the correct end, okay? So this is going to be the correct end for this tooth because my handle starts to lean towards it, okay? When I line the terminal shank up with this imaginary long axis of the tooth. So this is the correct end. here. The incorrect end, I'll show you again. The incorrect end is right here. Okay, the handle starts to lean away. If you're trying to do this with me and you're just kind of like, well, it's hard to tell on the camera, remember, I'm on the towards surface here on the tooth, and the correct end, the one that the handle leans towards, is going to be the side that says H6 on it, where H6 is closer to. That's where the correct end is. So if you're trying to do this at home with me and figure and see that slight lean towards that line, you'll know. Okay, so let's try it here on let's try one of these anterior teeth. Well, actually, no, because that's going to be hard for me to show that on camera. So let's just try this tooth right here next to it. Okay, we're going to do the away surface. Actually, I'm sorry. Let's just do the same tooth we're working on and the away surface here. And I want you to see if you can see on this camera which one you think is the correct end and the incorrect end, okay? So here's one side. I'm going to line up that terminal shank, so that way it is straight up and down with that long axis of the tooth. Okay, we're looking at the tooth that has the imaginary line I drew on it. Okay, where is that handle going towards? All right, so right now, here's that one side. I'm going to do the other side. I'll line up that line. Okay, might be hard to see on the camera, but I'm going to line up that line. Now, where does my handle go? This one, it's actually going away from that imaginary line that I drew. Okay, I'm doing the away surface right now. So I want it to actually lean towards that line. Okay, so if you thought that the first one was the correct end, you are correct. Do you see how the handle's leaning towards this middle of the tooth? You always want that to happen. So you just basically, I hope I'm explaining that so you understand, I just want my handle of the instrument, where my fingers are, to lean towards the tooth that I'm scaling. Okay, so to scale the away surfaces on this tooth, I have to use this end. To scale the towards surface of this tooth, I have to use the other end. Okay, remember when you're using the scalers, that we want to, when we can't have the terminal shank parallel with the long axis of the tooth when we scale. Instead, we have to lean in just a little bit in order to scale on those teeth, okay? So I'm just going to give you a little example of what that looks like, okay? So this is going to be me scaling on this tooth. You see how I'm leaning in towards that tooth? That's when I know I'm on the cutting edge. Nice small movements all the way up to the contact. This instrument is amazing for getting interproximal calculus and going right up to that contact. I don't want to have my instrument straight up and down, so I'm not on my cutting edge. When I lean in, that's when I start to get on my cutting edge, and you'll hear it. Okay? I hope that makes sense. And I hope that clarifies it, because I've looked at a lot of videos on YouTube and I've seen a lot of videos kind of explain it decent, but still sounds a little confusing. So hopefully this works for you. All right.